Hello Divination and welcome. In today's video, I want to show you how to recreate elegant themes click video walkthrough with Divi. This is the final result we're aiming to achieve. So without wasting a lot of time, let's dive in and let's get started. All right, so for this design, we're going to build this from scratch. So I'm going to come over here to Pages, click on Add New. And then I'm just going to call this ET example. I'll just put EG. All right, click on Use Divi Builder. And then we're going to build this from scratch. Oh, by the way, if you don't want to build this from scratch, but you'd like to use this layout, if you go to the post that I'll link to in the show notes below, you can just go and just download this layout and add it onto your page. So that's available for free for you to use. All right, so the column structure that I'm going to go with is this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And before we add any modules, let's head over here to row settings and do some customization. So first of all, I'm going to come over here to the design tab, click on sizing and activate this gutter width. So here we're going to set this to 2. Now the gutter width is just the space between the columns. Right, so the next thing I'm going to do is to adjust our width. So I'm going to come over here, set my width to 85 VW. And for our maximum width, I'm going to set this to 100%. Right, so for now, I'm just going to go ahead. In fact, we don't need to save now. Let's go to our column 1 settings. So I'm going to click here on this gear icon to access my column 1 settings. And in here, we're going to add some padding. So I'm going to come over here to the design tab, click on spacing, and the padding I'm going to add is to the top. So I'm going to set this to 5 VW. Now, we might as well add our settings for mobile devices. So this just ensures that it looks great on mobile devices too. So I'm going to click this arrow pointing up and in fact, we need this little arrow here. So for my tablet, I'm going to set this to 0. And for the phone, I'm also going to set this to 0. Now this tutorial is going to use some CSS code. So all the CSS codes and all the colors that we're using throughout this tutorial is going to be linked to the post in the show notes below. So I'm going to come over here to the advanced tab, click on CSS ID and Classes. And on the class, we need to add this class here, item responsive grid. And then we're going to save one more time. Now let's head over here to this first column and add a blurb module. I'm going to search for it and select it. So for our title here, we're just going to say build visually. We're going to remove all this text. And then over here on image and icon, we're going to choose icon. And the icon we're going to go with is a play button. So I'm going to scroll down here and here we go. So this is our play button. Now let's stylize our icon. So I'm going to come over here to design, image and icon. So the first thing I'm going to do is to add a color to this icon. And I'm just going to paste it in here. So for the icon placement, by default, it's set to the top. Let's set this to the left. Now we can also customize this icon size. So let's head over here to use icon font size. Now here we're going to set it to 2 VW. Now while we're here, let's also modify the color on hover. So I'm going to come over here and click this arrow pointing up, click on the hover tab, and I'm going to paste my hover color in here. So this is the effect that we're going to get when we hover over it. Next, let's head over here to our title settings. So I'm just going to click on this little brush tool and this will take me straight to heading 4. So our font here is going to be Lato. So I'm going to search for it. And by the way, these are free fonts. I'm going to select it. On the font weight, I'm going to set this to bold. And for my style, all this is going to be uppercase. Now let's set our text sizes. So by default, it's set to 18 pixels. I'm going to set this to 0.8 VW. And over here on the line height, I'm going to set this to 2 VW. And now you can see this has aligned these correctly. Right, so the next stage is to head over here to spacing because we need to add our custom padding. So I'm going to start here with my top padding. So I'm going to set this to 1 VW. And for my bottom padding, it's going to be 0.5 VW. And then for the left and right, it's going to be the same value of 1.2 VW. So I'm going to activate my chain. And now my value has been added to both sides. Now, while we're here on our spacing, I'm going to add some hover actions here. So I'm going to click here on the margin and we're going to add some hover settings. So on hover, we want to set this to 0.5 VW to both sides, left and right margin. But this is only going to happen on hover. So you can see here that it's only happening on hover. Next, let's add a border around this. So I'm going to come over here to border. We're going to give this some rounded corners. Maybe 10 pixels should be fine. So the next stage is to add our box shadow. So I'm going to come over here, and the option I'm going to go with is the first one here. So now you can see the rounded corners of our design. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start with the vertical position. So we're going to set this to 10, and blur strength, this needs to be 70. And let's also add a shadow color. So I'm going to click here on this eyedropper tool and paste my color here between the brackets. So now you can see that our button is very, very subtle. Now what we're also going to do here is to add a color on hover on the shadow. So I'm going to click here, click on the hover tab, and I'm going to add my color in here. Now this color here is going to have some transparency, so I'm just going to paste my color between the brackets just like that. So that's what's going to happen on hover. Now it's time to add our CSS ID and CSS class. So we're going to click here on the advanced tab, CSS ID and classes. So this is going to be my ID. And then I also need to add my class, which is video item cursor. Now, as I mentioned before, if you want to use the exact same settings as I'm using throughout this tutorial, I will leave a link to the post in the show notes below. So now that we've added all this, I'm going to save it. So to really save us time rebuilding this again, we are just going to duplicate this a few times. Okay. And then all we have to do now is to change the contents. So we can go in here now and just change this from a build visually to maybe effects. And this one here could be shape dividers. So you can see here I'm doing some inline editing. And by the way, this doesn't have to be shape dividers or effects or whatever it is. This could be anything that works with whatever project that you're working on. So this one here is going to be bulk editing. Right, so this next stage is very, very important. So we need to go in now and change our CSS IDs. So let's start with this one here. So I'm going to click on this gear icon, advanced, CSS ID and classes. So this item here is item 1. So what we need to do is to change the next one here to item 2, item 3, item 4. So that's what you need to do. So just click on the next one here. So for example, shape dividers here is going to be item 3. So just update it by just doing that. So in this design, we're also going to have similar buttons over here to the right. So let's go ahead and sort this out. So I'm going to click here on settings. So this column here, the third column, which is right here, doesn't have anything in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this. Okay. And then we're going to duplicate this, which is the first column that has all the buttons, but we want it over here all the way to the right. So I'm going to drag this, and now it's all the way to the right. So again, as we did before, we need to go in and change the titles of these buttons. But before we do that, we also need to go in and change the column structure. So I'm just going to save this, and then back over here, we need to make sure it's back to this one here, because as you can see, by default, it's chosen 3 equal columns. So we just need to go ahead and just do that. So these ones here, we're just going to rename these. So as I mentioned before, we're just going to give these different titles. Like for example, this is going to be layout library. So go ahead, rename these. So you can see here, I've renamed all these buttons. So what we need to do is to add our CSS classes. So as we did before, you just need to come over here, click on this gear icon, click advanced, CSS ID and classes. And if you recall, this was item 4. So this one here needs to be 5. And then this needs to be 6, 7, and 8. All right, so I've added all my CSS IDs. So the next stage now is to come over here to this middle column and add a text module. I'll select it, and we just need to get rid of all this text here. So the next thing we're going to do is to add a video background. So I'm going to come over here, click on the last tab, and then click on this plus button. So you can add any videos that you'd like. So this is the video that I'm going to use. And then next, let's head over here to the design tab. And here we need to go to sizing. So the first thing we want to do is to make sure our width is set to 100%. And then over here on spacing, we need to make sure that we have padding of 15 VW, both to the top and the bottom. And then on the tablet, this needs to be 24 VW. And then on the phone, it needs to be 26, both to the top and the bottom. So once you've added all this spacing, we also need to add some borders. So let's come over here. Now, if you recall, these buttons here have 10 pixels all around. So that's what we also need to replicate here. Make sure it's 10 pixels. And then over here on the border style, no, in fact, we need to go to box shadow. So here on the box shadow, we also need to choose this very first option. So first, I'm going to set this to 30 pixels. And then over here on the box shadow spread strength, I'm going to set this to -5. Now, the last thing we need to do here is to add our CSS ID. So let's head over here to the Advanced tab, CSS ID and Classes, and just make sure you have Video Walkthrough 1 set here on the CSS ID and Classes. And then we're going to save. Now, what we need to do next is to clone all these text modules 7 times. So to do that, you can just come over here and then just click on this clone button, and you want to do this 7 times. Now, what you may find also easier to do is to come over here to expand settings, click here on wireframe view, and you can see here it's much easier to clone just by clicking on this button here, and visually you can see where all these are. Now, here's the next thing. So what we need to do here, and in fact for this, let's stay here on this wireframe view. So we need to go again into our text module, head over here to Advanced, and then we need to change the CSS ID and Classes to Video Walkthrough 2. For the second one, and then you want to go ahead and select 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so make sure you go ahead and do that. I'm going to save this. So I've done that already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to column 1, click on this plus button and add a code module. I'm going to select it and I'm going to paste my code in here. Now this code that I'm using can be found in the post, which I'll link to in the show notes below. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now over here, you also need to add another code module. So I'm going to click on this plus button and I'm going to choose my code module and paste my code in here and save. So now let's save and let's take a quick look at this. So I'm going to exit the Visual Builder. And now you can see when I click, it takes me to that particular item. And also the hover effect here is also working. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and do follow us on our social media platforms. By doing so, you'll be notified every time we release new tutorials. Until next time, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.